Hey crew, it's Bit, and I'm back with some more Socrates. Today we're going to be diving back into the works of Plato, and we are starting off on a brand new work. So we're going to go to the title page here so that y'all can go back and see and do. This is the Dialogues of Plato as translated by David Haran. I know you can't see the very top, but I would have to move the screen. It just says the Dialogues of Plato, but it's the translation by David Haran. He has made this freely available to people. He has spent a considerable amount of time going back and translating the works himself, and I'm appreciative of it, and the link is provided down below. Y'all go back and show some love in any way that you feel is appropriate. We are going to be diving into the Charmides dialogue this time, and that is because on the wiki it is the second one, right? You had Apology and you had Charmides, and we jumped ahead to two of them, and now we're going to go back and try and do them in order. The persons in this dialogue are Socrates, who is the narrator, Chaerephon, Critias, and Charmides. Now, this one is not really delineated the way the other ones were, where it actually told you who was speaking, so it can get a little bit confusing. Sorry for that. Um, but Socrates is the narrator, so for the most part, the dialogue will be his, and he will be asking people questions, and the people who respond to those questions is who is talking in the other part. All right, so to the text. We arrived back yesterday evening at the camp at Potidea, and as I was returning after a long absence, I was delighted to go to my familiar haunts. I went especially to the wrestling school of Taurus, the one opposite the Queen's Shrine, and I came across a lot of people there, most of whom were familiar to me, but there were also some whom I did not know. And when they saw me coming in so unexpectedly, they immediately greeted me from all sides, and Chaerephon, being the mad person he is, jumped up in their midst and ran towards me and took me by the hand and said, "Socrates, how did you survive the battle?" And a little before we left, there had been a battle at Potidea, which the people here had just heard about. And in reply to him, I said, "Like this, just as you see me." "Well, it was reported here," said he, "that there has been an extremely fierce battle in which many people we know had died." "And for the most part, that report is true," said I. "And were you actually there in the battle?" he asked. "I was there." "Then sit down here and tell us all about it, for we have not yet found out all the details with any clarity." And as he spoke, he led me over and seated me beside Critias, the son of Calliscrus. And so I sat beside him and greeted Critias and the others, and then gave them a full account of the news from the camp, answering the various questions that each of them asked. And once we had had enough of such stories, I in turn questioned them about the state of affairs here, about the status of philosophy, and about the young people, and whether any of them had proved to be especially notable for wisdom or beauty, or both. And Critias glanced over at the door and saw some young men coming in, engaged in mutual banter, and another group following behind. "Socrates," he said, "as far as the beautiful ones are concerned, I think you'll get your answer straight away. Yes, those fellows who are coming in at the moment are leading the way, and they are lovers of the fellow who is regarded, nowadays at any rate, as the most beautiful of them all, and it looks to me as if the lad himself is already nearby." "Who is he?" I asked, "and whose son is he?" "I presume you know him," he had replied, "although he is not yet of age before you went away. He is Charmides, the son of Glaucon, my uncle, so he is my cousin." "I know him indeed, by Zeus," said I, "since he was remarkable even when he was still a boy, and I presume at this stage he is already quite a fine young man." "You will know soon enough," said he, "how grown up he is, and what he is like." And as he was saying all of this, Charmides entered. Now, my friend, do not use me as the measure, for I am a white line on a white surface when it comes to beautiful people, since almost anyone who has come of age looks beautiful to me. Nevertheless, at that moment, the young man looked amazing to me in stature, in beauty, and all the others seemed to be in love with him. They were so astounded and excited when he entered that there were lots more lovers following behind, too. Now, for men of our age, this response was no great surprise, but I paid attention to the young boys, and not one of them, not even the smallest of them, so much as glanced at anyone else. No, they all looked at him as though he were a statue. And Chaperon called out to me, Socrates, how does this young man look to you? He said, Isn't he fair of face? Exceedingly so, said I. Yet, if this fellow were to strip, you would think he had no face, so utterly beautiful is his physique. Now, the others all said the same thing as Chaperon, and I said, By Heracles, what an indomitable man you are describing. If he happens to possess one additional quality, a minor, what? Asked Critias. If he happens to have a well-developed soul, said I, and since he belongs to your family, Critias, that is the sort of person he should presumably be. Yes, said he is very noble and good in that sense too. Well, why don't we strip this particular part of him and look at that, before we look at his body, for I am quite sure that he is now at an age where he is willing to engage in discourse. Very much so, said Critias, and mark my words, he is also a lover of wisdom, and in the opinions of others, and of himself, quite a poet. This, Critias, my friend, is a beauty that belongs in your family from the past through your ancestral connection with Solon. But why don't you call the young man over and show him to me? For, presumably, even if he happened to be younger still, it would not embarrass him to converse with us in your presence, you who are both his guardian and his cousin. Now, there's a lot to unpack in here, right? Now, I don't know if you're new to my channel, but if you're new to my channel, I don't care about sexual preference. Like, I really don't. As long as you're not trying to change anything you were born with, right? I don't give a what you do with you. And the defining line is an age one, but that's an arbitrary one set by society, so I don't know what age they were using, and I know what age we use, and I have no desire for younger people, but Socrates was a devourer of things, right? He liked both sides of that particular fence, and he did not particularly care from whence it came. And so he was not what people would now think of as a virtuous or a moral type of person. Doesn't bother me as much as it does other people. But he is absolutely at least a bi, right? He has children later in life, so he is very much attracted to the young men. Now, where that dividing line falls, I don't know, but he makes it explicit that it has to be above whatever age they set as consent. So I'm going to assume he's not a pedophile, even though he does seem to have noticed them prior to. Yes, that's a good suggestion, Socrates, said he. We will call him. And with that, he said to his attendant, Boy, call Charmides and say that I want to introduce him to a physician in relation to that ailment he told me he was suffering from yesterday. And then Critias turned to me and explained. In fact, he said recently that he has a headache when he gets up in the morning. So, what is to stop you from pretending to him that you know a remedy for a headache? Nothing, said I. Just let him come over. Oh, he will come, said he. Well, that is what actually happened. Indeed, he arrived and caused a great deal of laughter. For, in order to make room for Charmides to sit beside him, each of us who were already seated pushed eagerly against his neighbor until the fellow seated at one end had to stand up, and we knocked the fellow at the other end off sideways. And then Charmides came and sat between myself and Critias, and there, and then my friends, I was already at a loss, and my former confidence was knocked out of me. The confidence that I could converse with him quite easily. But when Critias was explaining that I was the one who knew the remedy, the lad looked into my eyes in a manner that defies description, sat up as if to ask me a question, and everyone in the palestra surged all around us in a circle. Then indeed, my noble friend, I beheld the inside of his garment, and I was inflamed, and was no longer in myself. And I decided that when it came to love, Citius was the wisest poet. When speaking of a beautiful boy, he advised that the fawn should be careful when it arrives in front of a lion, lest he be seized as a piece of meat. Indeed, I thought that I myself had been captured by a creature of this sort. Nonetheless, when he asked me if I knew the remedy for the headache, I somehow replied with difficulty that I knew it. Well, what is it? He asked, and I replied that it was a certain leaf, but in addition to the remedy, there was also a certain incantation. And if a person were to chant this at the same time he used the remedy would make him completely healthy. But without the incantation, the leaf would be of no benefit. Then I will write down the incantation, call it out. Shall I do it only if you persuade me, said I, or even if you do not? So he laughed and said, If I persuade you, Socrates. So be it, said I. And are you certain of my name? Unless I am doing you wrong, for amongst my own age group you are talked about quite a lot. And I also remember you associating with Critias here, even when I was a child. Well done, said I. Yes. I shall speak more openly to you about the kind of incantation it happens to be. I was at a loss just now as to how I might show you its power, Charmides, for this is the sort of incantation that is unable to make the head alone healthy. Rather, just as you may have already heard from the good physicians, whenever someone comes to them with sore eyes, they say somehow that they cannot attempt to treat the eyes on their own, but it would also be necessary to treat the head at the same time if the eyes are to be in a good condition. And what is more, it is highly irrational to think the head could ever be treated just by itself without treating the whole body. So, based on this principle, they endeavored to treat and to cure the part, along with the whole, by regimens applicable to the entire body. Aren't you aware that this is what they say and how this matter stands? Entirely so, he replied. In that case, do you think I am expressing this well? And do you accept the principle? Without reservation, he replied. And when I heard his approval, I recovered my confidence. My courage gradually revived once more. My spirit was rekindled. And I said, well, that is the sort of incantation that this is, Charmides. I learned it up there on the campaign from one of the Thracian physicians of Zalmoxis, who are also said to confer immortality. The Thracian said that the Greek physicians who say what I just told you are right to say so, but, said he, Zalmoxis, our king, who is a god, says that just as one should not attempt to cure eyes without a head and head without body, so one should not attempt to cure body without curing soul. This is the reason why so many diseases evade the Greek physicians. It is because they disregard the whole, which needs to be cared for. Because if the whole is not in good condition, it is impossible for the part to be well. For, everything that comes forth from the soul, both what is good and what is bad for the body and for the entire person. And these flow from there, just as they flow from the head to the eye. So it is necessary to treat that first and foremost. If any part of the head or the rest of the body is to be in good condition. And he said, blessed man, the soul is treated with certain incantations, and these incantations are beautiful words. From such words as these, sound-mindedness is engendered in our souls. And once it has been engendered and is present, it is easy at that stage to provide health to the head and the rest of the body too. So, when teaching me about the remedy and the incantations, he said, let no one who has not first submitted his soul to be treated by you with the incantation persuade you to treat his head. And indeed, said he, this is the mistake some physicians make in treating people nowadays. They endeavor to be physicians of sound-mindedness and bodily health separately. And he commanded me, quite forcibly, to allow no one, no matter how wealthy, well-born, or handsome he might be, to persuade me to do otherwise. So, since I have sworn an oath, and it is necessary that I obey it, I shall obey it. As for you, if you wish to follow the orders of the stranger, and first submit your soul to be enchanted by the Thracian charms, I shall then apply the leaf to your head. If not, we do not know what we should do with you, dear Charmides. Now, When Critias heard me saying this, he said, "This headache could turn out to be a godsend for this young man, Socrates, if he will be compelled to improve his thinking because of his head. But I tell you, Charmides is not regarded as superior to the rest of his age group for his looks alone, but also for the quality for which you claim to have the incantation. You say it is for sound-mindedness, don't you?" "Very much so," I replied. "Well, mark my words," he said, "he is regarded far and away as the most sound-minded lad there is nowadays. And in all other respects he is as good as anyone else of that age." "And indeed, Charmides," I said, "it is only right that you should be superior to the others in all qualities of this sort. Indeed, I do not think anyone else here could so easily point to two families in Athens that, united and combined, are likely to beget more noble and exalted offspring than the families you were born from. Indeed, your father's family, the family of Critias, the son of Charmides, eulogized by Anacreon, Solon, and many other poets, has been presented to us as a superior in nobility and excellence, and in anything else that counts as happiness. And the same goes for your mother's family, since it is said that no one on the continent was reputed to be a more noble and influential man than your uncle Phrilampes, who went on embassies to the great king, or anyone else on the continent. And this side of your family, in its entirety, is not at all inferior to the other. So, sprung from such families as these, it is likely that you are foremost in everything. Now, from what we can see of your physique, dear son of Glaucon, I do not think you have fallen below the standard of any of your forebears in any respect. And if you really are naturally endowed with enough sound-mindedness too, and the other qualities our friend here mentioned, then your mother bore a blessed son indeed, dear Charmides. So, this is how matters stand. If, as Critias here says, sound-mindedness is already present in you, and you are sufficiently sound-minded, you no longer have need of the incantations of Zalmoxis or of Abaris, the Hyperborean, and you should be given the head remote remedies straight away. But if you seem as yet to be deficient in these, you should chant the incantation before you are given the remedy. So tell me yourself whether you agree with this man. Do you claim that you already possess enough sound-mindedness, or are you deficient in this?" Now, Charmides blushed at first and appeared even more beautiful, since his modesty suited his years. And then he answered in a dignified manner and said that it would not be easy in the present situation either to admit or deny what he had been asked. "Indeed," said he, "if I say I am not sound-minded, this is not just a strange thing to say against oneself, but at the same time I would be proving Critias here a liar, and many others too who regard me as sound-minded, because this man says so. Then again, if I say that I am sound-minded and sing my own praises, that will surely appear offensive, so I do not know how I am to answer you." And I said that sounds reasonable to me, Charmides, and in my opinion, we should jointly consider whether or not you have acquired what I am asking you about, so that you are not forced to say what you do not wish to say. Nor shall I, for my part, turn my hand to medical treatment without due deliberation. So, if it is acceptable to you, I want to consider this along with you. If not, let us leave it. "Well," said he, "nothing could be more acceptable. So, to that end, let's consider this in whatever manner you think better." "Then," said I think our investigation into this is best conducted as follows. Indeed, it is obvious that if sound-mindedness is present in you, you are able to form some opinion about it. For once sound-mindedness is in you, if it is actually in you, it must, I presume, produce a certain awareness from which you would have some opinion about it as to what sound-mindedness is and what sort of thing it is. Don't you think so?" "Yes, I think so," he replied. "In that case," said I, "since in fact you know how to speak Greek, I'm sure that you could also say this appears to you to be." "Perhaps," said he. "Well then," said I, "so that we may hazard a guess as to whether your sound-mindedness is in you or not, You should tell us what you say sound-mindedness is in your opinion. Before we get into it, I think that it is the ability to question whether or not you are right thinking. Like, I haven't read through this all the way, so I don't know where it's going, but that is me. Uh, well, now, initially he was reluctant and did not really want to answer, but then he said that, in his opinion, sound mindedness is doing everything in an orderly manner and quietly, and walking on the streets in conversation and doing everything else in similar fashion. And in my opinion, what you're asking me about is, in short, a certain quietness. Well, now, said I, is this right? People do say, at any rate, that those who are quiet are sound minded, so let us see if they have a point. Tell me then, wouldn't you say sound mindedness is something good? Entirely so, he replied. Well, for the writing teacher, is it best to write similar letters quickly or quietly? Quickly. And what about reading? Is it good to do so quickly or quietly? Quickly. Yes. And are playing the harp quickly and wrestling nimbly much better than doing so quietly and slowly? Yes. What about boxing and the pancration? Isn't the situation the same? Entirely so. In running and jumping too, and in all the activities of the body, aren't those that occur nimbly and in quickly the good ones, while those that are done with difficulty and quietly the bad ones? Apparently. Then it is apparent to us that what is best, in this case of the body at any rate, is not what is quietest, but what is quickest and nimblest. Is this so? Entirely so. And was sound-mindedness something good? Yes. Then, in the case of the body, at least, not quietness but quickness would be more sound-minded, since sound-mindedness is something good. So it seems, said he. What about this, said I? Which is better, ease of learning or difficulty in learning? Ease of learning. And does the learning involve learning quickly, while difficulty in learning involves learning quietly and slowly? Yes. And isn't it better to teach someone else quickly and energetically rather than quietly and slowly? Yes. What about this? Is it better to recollect and to remember quietly and slowly, or energetically and quickly? Energetically and quickly, he replied. And isn't quick-wittedness a certain nimbleness of the soul rather than quietness? True. And for the writing teacher and the harp teacher, or anyone else, isn't it best to understand what is said, not as quietly as possible, but as quickly as possible? Yes. Then again, in the investigations of the soul and in deliberation, is it not the quietest person, I think, or the one who deliberates and makes discoveries with difficulty, who seems to be worthy of praise, but the one who does this most easily and quickly? This is so. Therefore, Charmides, said I, in actions, whether they concern the soul or the body, do those that are quickest and nimblest appear nobler to us than those that are slowest and quietest? Quite likely, said he. So, sound-mindedness would not be quietness, nor would the sound-minded life be quiet, at least on the basis of this argument, since it must be good if it is sound-minded. And so, there are two possibilities. Either there are no circumstances where quiet actions in life are better than quick and vigorous ones, or there are a few. But my friend, even if it is the case that just as many quiet actions as vigorous and quick ones happen to be good, not even on this basis would sound-mindedness consist more in acting quietly than in acting energetically and quickly, either in walking and talking or in anything else. Nor would the quiet, orderly life be more sound-minded than the one that is not quiet. This is because, in our argument, we concluded sound-mindedness with good, yet the quick actions have turned out to be no less good than the quiet ones. I think, Socrates, said he, that what you have said is correct. Then, Charmides, said I, once again pay even closer attention to yourself. Look into yourself. Reflect upon the sort of person Sound-mindedness makes you by its presence. And what must it be like in order to produce such an effect? And once you have drawn your conclusions from this, declare nicely and courageously, what does it appear to you to be? And he paused and scrutinized himself very courageously and said, well, it seems to me that sound-mindedness makes a person ashamed and produces modesty. And modesty is what sound-mindedness actually is. Well, said I, didn't we just agree that sound-mindedness is something good? Entirely so, he replied. And aren't the sound-minded men also good? Yes. Now, could something that does not produce good men be good? Of course not. So, sound-mindedness is not only noble, it is also good. Yes, I think so. What is this, said I? You don't believe what Homer says when he says modesty is not a good companion for a needy man? I do, and so modesty is, it seems, both good and not good, apparently. And yet, sound-mindedness is good if its presence really does make people good and not bad. Why, yes, I think that is how matters stand, just as you say. Then, sound-mindedness would not be modesty since it actually happens to be good, while modesty is no more than good than bad. Well, Socrates, it seems to me that what you are saying is correct, but consider this. What do you think of the following statement about sound-mindedness? Indeed, I have just remembered hearing someone say that sound-mindedness would be doing what belongs to yourself. Now, consider whether the person who said this was incorrect in saying so, in your opinion. You wretch, said I, you've heard that from Critias here, or from someone else who is wise. It seems he has heard it from someone else, said Critias, since it was certainly not from me. Socrates, what difference does it make from whom I heard it, said Charmides. None, I replied, for we should not really consider who said this, but whether what is being said is true or not. Now you are speaking aright, said he. Yeah, by Zeus, but if we find out what it means, I would be surprised, for it seems like some sort of riddle. Why is that, he asked. Because the speaker, said I, in saying that sound-mindedness is doing what belongs to you, did not intend the words in the way that he expressed them. Or do you think the writing teacher does nothing whenever he writes or reads? No, I think he does something. So, do you think the grammar teacher only writes and reads his own name and teaches you boys to do this too? Or do you write the names of your enemies no less than those of yourself and your friends? No less. Well, in this respect, were you being a busybody and not being sound-minded in doing so? Not at all. And yet, you are not doing what belongs to yourself if writing and reading is doing something. And so they are. And indeed, my friend, healing, house building, weaving, or performing any of the tasks of a skill by any skill whatsoever is presumably doing something. Entirely so. What about this? Do you think a city would be well administered under this law, calling upon each person to weave and wash his own garment, or to cobble his own shoes, to make his own oil flask and scraper and everything else, on the same principle that each person should not touch what belongs to others, but work at and do what belongs to himself? No, I do not think so. And yet, said I, the city that administered sound-mindedly would be well administered. How could it not be, said he. So, performing actions of this sort and doing what belongs to you in this way would not be sound-mindedness, said I. Apparently not. So the person who said that doing what belongs to yourself is sound-mindedness was, it seems, speaking a riddle, as I just said just now. For I presume he was not quite so simple-minded. Or did you hear some foolish fellow saying this, Charmides? Far from it, he replied. In fact, he seemed extremely wise. Well then, I am of the opinion, to an even greater extent, that if he posed a riddle as to the difficulty of recognizing what exactly doing what belongs to yourself is. Perhaps, said he. Well, what exactly would doing what belongs to yourself be, can you say? By Zeus, I do not know, he replied, but whatever, perhaps even the person who said this did not know what he intended. And as he said this, he smiled and glanced over at Crataeus. Now, Crataeus had obviously been quite agitated for some time, and being eager to impress Charmides and the company, he had restrained himself with difficulty in the previous discussion. But at this stage, he was unable to do so. Indeed, the suspicion I held now seemed to be all the more true. That Charmides had heard this answer about sound-mindedness from Crataeus. So, Charmides, who did not wish to furnish an account of the answer himself, but wanted Crataeus to do so instead, kept stirring up Crataeus and pointing out that he himself had been refuted. But Crataeus could not bear this. Rather, he seemed to me to be angry with Charmides, just like a poet with an actor who recites his compositions badly. So he looked at him and said, Charmides, do you really think that if you do not know what exactly the person who said that sound-mindedness is doing what belongs to yourself intended, the man himself did not know either? But Crataeus, best of men, I said, it is no surprise that he does not understand at his age. But I expect you are likely to know on account of your age and experience. So, if you concur that sound-mindedness is what this fellow says it is, and you take over the argument, I would much prefer to investigate along with you whether the statement is true or not. Yes, I concur emphatically, and I am taking over, he said. Well, you are acting quite nobly, he said. Tell me then, do you also concur what I was asking about just now, that all craftsmen make something, and what just happened there? I haven't had to stop it too much. This is pretty self-explanatory, right? We just swapped who is going to be being addressed. It's no longer going to be Charmides, but it's going to be Crataeus. Tell me then, do you also concur about what I was asking just now, that all craftsmen make something? I do. Now, do they seem to you to make only what belongs to themselves, or also what belongs to others? What belongs to others too? So, are they being sound-minded, even though they are not making only what belongs to themselves? Is there any reason why not? He replied. None, for me at least, said I, but look, there may be one for the man who proposes that sound-mindedness is doing what belongs to oneself, and then says there is no reason why those who make what belongs to others cannot be sound-minded too. Yes, presumably I have agreed, says he, but that those who do what belongs to others are sound-minded, and if I agreed that those who make what belongs to others are sound-minded. Tell me, said I, don't you call making and doing the same? I certainly do not, he replied, nor working and making either, for I learned from Hesiod, who also said that work is no disgrace. But do you actually think that if he called the sort of works you referred to just now as working and doing, he could accept that there is no disgrace in someone being a cobbler, a fishmonger, or a prostitute? Don't you believe it, Socrates? No, this man too, in my opinion, considered making as other than doing and working. And although something one makes is sometimes a disgrace, whenever it is not accompanied by nobility, no work is ever a disgrace. For whatever is made nobly and beneficially, these he called works, and he referred to makings as this sort of workings and doings. And we should say that he believed that the like of these alone are kindred to us, while those that are harmful to all are alien. So we should presume that Hesiod, and any other man of understanding, calls the person what belongs to himself sound-minded. Crataeus, said I understood your argument almost as soon as you began, that you call what is kindred to us and what belongs to ourselves good, and you call the makings of good people doings. And indeed, I have heard Prodeus drawing thousands of such distinctions about words. Well, I allow you to employ each of the words in any way you wish, only please make clear in every case what you are applying the name to. So now, once more from the beginning, define this more clearly. The doing or making, or however you wish to name it, of what is good. Is this what you say sound-mindedness is? I do, he replied. So, the person who does what is bad is not sound-minded, but the person who does what is good is. Best of men, said he, isn't this how it seems to you? Never mind that, said I. Let us not consider my opinion at this stage, but what you are now saying. Well then, I deny that someone who makes what is not good but bad is sound-minded. Rather, someone who makes what is good but not bad is sound-minded, for I am defining sound-mindedness in plain terms for you as doing what is good. And there is perhaps, said I, no reason why you should not be speaking the truth, yet I am wondering if you think sound-minded people are unaware of being sound-minded. No, I don't think so, he replied. Well, didn't you say a little earlier, I asked, that there is no reason why craftsmen, even those who makes what belongs to others, cannot be sound-minded? Yeah, I said so, he replied. What of it? Nothing, but please tell me whether you think a physician, when making someone healthy, makes something that is beneficial both to himself and to the person he treats. I think so. Isn't someone who is doing this doing what is needed? Yes. Isn't someone who is doing what is needed sound-minded? Sound-minded indeed. Now, is it also necessary for the physician to recognize when he is applying the treatment beneficially and when he is not? And for each of the craftsmen to recognize when he is going to gain an advantage from the work he is doing and when not? Perhaps not. In that case, said I, having done something beneficially or harmfully, the physician sometimes does not recognize himself how he has done it, even though, according to your argument, in doing it beneficially, he has done it sound-mindedly. Isn't that how you put it? I did. And so it seems in doing something beneficially, even though he does it sound-mindedly and is sound-minded, he is sometimes unaware himself of being sound-minded. But Socrates, this can never happen. And if you think about anything I accepted earlier leads necessarily to this conclusion, I would rather retract any of them, and I would not be ashamed to say I had been wrong, rather than ever concede that a person who is himself unaware of himself is sound-minded. Indeed, I would almost declare that this is just what sound-mindedness is, recognizing oneself. And I go along with whomever set up such an inscription in Delphi. In fact, I think this inscription was set up in this way as an actual salutation by the god to those who enter, instead of hail, because this situation, hail, is not right, nor should we exhort one another to do this, but to be sound-minded. And so the god addresses those who enter the temple in this way somewhat differently than when humans do. And whoever set up the inscription had this in mind, in my opinion. And to anyone who ever enters, he says just one thing: be sound-minded. And indeed he speaks somewhat enigmatically, like a seer, for know thyself and be sound-minded are the same as the inscription declares, and so do I. But someone could presume that they are different, and I think this is what happens to those who dedicated the later inscriptions. Nothing in excess, and give a pledge, and ruin is nigh. In fact, these men thought that know thyself was a piece of advice, rather than a salutation by the god for the sake of those who would enter the temple. Accordingly, they dedicated those inscriptions so that they could offer advice that was every bit as useful. Now then, Socrates, the reason why I'm saying all of this is as follows. I'm retracting everything that we said probably previously. Perhaps you said something on these issues that was more correct. Perhaps I did, but nothing we were saying was particularly clear. Yet, I am prepared now to present you with an argument for this, but if you still do not accept that sound-mindedness is recognizing your own self. But Critias, said I, you are addressing me as if I profess to have knowledge of the issues I am asking you about, and could agree with you if I wanted to. But that's not how matters stand. No. In fact, I am investigating anything that is ever put forward, along with you, because I myself do not know. So, I am prepared to say whether I accept or do not accept once I have considered this, but please wait until I consider it. Well, consider it then, said he. Yes, indeed, said I am considering it. Well, if sound mindedness is recognizing something, it would be a knowledge, obviously be knowledge, and a knowledge of something, wouldn't it? It would, he said, of yourself. And isn't medicine knowledge of health? I asked. Entirely so. Then, if you were to ask me, since medicine is knowledge of health, what use is it to us and what does it bring about? I could reply that it is a considerable benefit since it brings about health, a good outcome for us if you accept this. I accept this. Then, if you should also ask me, and since house building is the knowledge of building houses, what outcome do you say it produces? I would say houses, and the same goes for other skills. Now, since you say it is knowledge of yourself, you should indeed be able to speak on behalf of sound-mindedness. And if you are asked, Critias, since sound-mindedness is knowledge of yourself, what good outcome does it bring about for us, worthy of its name? Come on, speak. But Socrates said, you're not investigating this correctly, for this knowledge is not like in nature to the other knowledges, nor are there others like one another. But you are conducting an investigation as if they are alike. Tell me then, in the case of the skill of calculation or of geometry, what outcome is there that corresponds to houses in the case of house building, or a garment in the case of weaving? And other outcomes like these, the various products of various skills that one could point to. Well, are you also able to point out an outcome of this kind to me in these two cases? No, you will not be able to do so. And I replied, what you say is true, but I am able to point out to you something that each of these knowledges is knowledge of. Something that happens to be other than the knowledge itself. For example, calculation is presumably of the even and the odd, and how they relate to themselves and to one another in quantity. Is this so? Very much so, he replied. Aren't the even and the odd different from calculation itself? How could they not be? Then again, although weighing is weighing of the heavier and lighter weight, the heavy and the light are different from weighing itself. Do you agree? I do. Then state what it is that sound-mindedness is knowledge of, something that happens to be different from sound-mindedness itself. That is my point, Socrates. You arrive in your inquiry at the very thing that distinguishes sound-mindedness from all the knowledges. But now you are investigating some likeness to the others, but that is not how matters stand. Rather, although all the others are knowledge of another, but not of themselves, this one alone is knowledge of the other knowledges and of itself. And this has not escaped your notice, far from it. No, I think that you are now doing what you denied you were doing just now. You were just trying to refute me, and you have abandoned the issue that the argument is concerned with. What an assumption to make, said I, that I am refuting you as best I can. I am refuting you from any other motive than the very motive from which I would also scrutinize what I do myself, what I myself am saying, for fear that I might ever unwittingly be thinking I know something when I do not know. And so I now declared that this is what I am doing. Considering the argument, most of all for the sake of myself, but also perhaps for my other companions. Or don't you think it is a good, common to almost all of humanity, that each of these things that comes are to be seen clearly just as it is? I do, Socrates, very much so. Then, blessed man, be bold in answering the question based on how it appears to you, and never mind whether it is Critias or Socrates who is being refuted. Just apply your mind to the argument itself and consider how exactly it turns out under scrutiny. Yes, said he. That's what I'll do, since you were saying what you were saying sounds reasonable to me. And this is where we're going to wrap up part one. Right? We're about halfway. This will make a good solid breaking point, and they're about to get into a whole new set of arguments, and so we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. What I am doing here is trying to expand my knowledge base, right? I assumed that I was well read, that I understood Plato and Socrates because of my high school education and a couple pieces of the Republic, and I was wrong. And so I am increasing my knowledge base by reading this. I'm analyzing it as I go along. That's why I stop and talk about it, and I'm working it out in my brain and making sure that I agree with all of the things. So far, they're still making their arguments. There's not a whole lot for me to expound upon. Maybe there will be in the next part. But the main thing here is to increase my knowledge, to understand the arguments, to know what I'm talking about. That is, in my opinion, sound-mindedness. To not automatically assume that you are infallible, but instead to assume that there is a possibility at least that you are wrong in anything you're talking about. Even if it is your profession, even if you've been doing it for 30 years. Just because you've been doing it for a long time doesn't make it correct. Sometimes we need to be open to correction. All the time, we need to be open to correction. We may not always be wrong, but there is always a chance that we may be wrong. And that is, I feel, what Socrates is trying to drive home here. To say that you know definitively is a hard thing to do about anything because there's so much that we do not understand. There's so much outside the scope of us being able to process it. Reading through these dialogues, you can see that they were relaying wisdom to the best of their ability, but some of the things that they say are outside of wisdom, right? It's outside of our scope of wisdom, the things that we know now, right? When we were talking about the triangles and how I believe that that's atoms and that he had a vision of these things in action, and that was his best way of explaining it. But we know that it's not just four basic elements now. We know that there are a lot of elements and that they make up all of the things, but they're made up of smaller things too, and that those things are attracted to each other, and we're understanding those things, but to say that we know is a very foolish thing to do. We can give the best understanding that we have, but you never should say that you definitively know, right? Unless it is something dealing specifically with yourself. I did cut my finger off. I didn't. I got all 10 of them, but something along that nature. And that's where I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a not too difficult topic, right? We're not really diving into deep rhetoric here. This is not solid, like hard arguments. This has all been pretty much common sense. Ask question, refuted, ask question, refuted. Get through the dialogue so that you can understand a little bit about how wisdom is grown. I'm enjoying it. I'm hoping you enjoy it. If you're enjoying what I'm doing here, make sure you let me know down below. I'm going to continue doing it anyway. I'm still going to put it up, but it's nice to get some encouragement every once in a while. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. You're perfect. God loves you. You're perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit State. Peace.